same time, like I said, I turned around and I immediately replanted it, which was not something I really wanted to do, but I felt like it was the best thing to do because it was faster. And we know that we're going to be putting fertilizer in there. We have an injection system, so we know that we're going to be replenishing the soil to an extent, but we're kind of front loaded it before that, right? So before I harvested, I went in and I already knew I was going to do this, and I put that fertilizer in early so that that bed would be nice and charged and ready to go. And then I put a pre-planting fertilizer in, knowing once again that this fertilizer would take 2 weeks to break down. So by the time the corn started getting up and growing, it would get some fertilizer pushed to it. So we plan around that stuff.
I'm smiling because my corn is going to follow my broccoli this year. Look at us. Yeah.
There you go.
Um, so my beds in Chicago, Illinois are absolutely resting January and February hard stop.
Yeah.
I would also say that for much of December and much of March. So that's December, January, February, and March. And so I look at that to say they should be well rested. And in the best version of myself, I should be able to push them towards the end of March through the end of November.
Yeah. I
Right.
agree
Like
with
I
that.
should be able to plant based on my practices nonstop. Now, one could argue maybe my garden has benefited from some of my pauses and some of the empty time that they've had. Maybe they haven't. I don't know. But and again, the best version of myself, I would be planting from, let's call it planting April through September, growing April through November, something living in those spaces all that time.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's the difference between southern gardeners or
Hmm.
warm climate gardeners and cold climate gardeners. When you live in a colder climate, you typically will automatically get a couple months,
Hmm.
and I mean at that point it's like put that fresh manure on early in or early in the winter and just let it sit all winter. And then between the snow and the rain and the weather, it'll all just break down and start going. So, yeah, that absolutely is a way to go. I think that the temptation when you're a warm climate gardener, more southern, is to just constantly push it, push it, push it. And while you can do that to an extent, I think we do need to find a happy balance, a medium in there in which we can really break it down and let it get some rest to some extent. And this episode is not about bed resting, but I think it's, a solid mulch layer, stuff like that, so it can start to break down as well will really help. But
Yeah, that's the if you, I go back to the top of the episode when it comes to making sure you've done an inventory. Mulch is a great example of what are you covering these beds with, right? Were they all covered? Some of, depending on what you're using, some of that's going to break down mid-season. I still have, as of the recording of this episode, I have a leaf blower, mulcher, vacuumer in my garage, and I have 2 bags of 2023 leaves, beautiful leaves too. I have to call my leaf pusher. I did collect these last year that I'm trying to shred in preparation for. There's some spaces that still need to be covered, but again, as I kind of get into the summer season, I'm going to have a heavier layer of mulch. You hear that? The demands of that mulch are higher as the season goes on, right? It didn't do that much work in the spring, but come summer, boy, that soil and all of the elements are going to be eaten right through it. Or I mean, it's going to break down faster.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things too where you look at it and again, it's an insurance policy. So adding that mulch. So the next task in my garden is mulching. Hard stop. I have to go out and I have to mulch everything. And that's just to help everything, obviously protect the soil. But as we get into the hotter months, it'll start to
Hmm.
protect the water, conserve more water, stuff like that.
Hmm.
But also, it's just like you said, it'll start to break down. And we almost bank on that. I use straw mulch, which isn't the highest nutrient producer, for a garden, but it's convenient. It's easily obtainable for me. I have a reliable source. So we do use it, and we do have to top it up. But if you put it in, so we're still in the spring season at the time of this recording. Is this coming out? Yeah, this is still coming out in the spring season. So we're just a couple weeks before. But as you do that, you know, it's about a month when this airs before the summer season. You will already start to get that breaking down effect, and then it'll go in to the middle of the summer season, in which we will probably, depending on how deep I mulch, add more. But even on top of that, you don't want to leave a solid mat on top for when you go to replant in the fall, but you want it to be starting to break down. So you again are getting that insurance policy and feeding more and more and more. And that's what really helps set your garden up for the next season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna squeeze this in here. So for mulch, suppression of weeds, water retention, right? Keeping the soil covered and protected, so protecting against erosion for the soil. The amount of weeds are higher generally, just like everything else is growing in the summer than they are in the spring for me. And how thick of a layer of mulch? I said shredded leaves. I'm in my garage shredding them. Good grief, it's a whole mess. Literally, it's a mess. Shredding them because I don't want the leaves to be matted when I lay them down in the
Yeah.
garden spaces. Right, that's huge for me. And so all of those things are going to feed into, no pun intended, an easier season for me for summer. I was out looking this morning and I did the initial layer of leaf mulch, shredded leaves, and I did an excellent job of by hand picking the weeds, but it's in the cage baby, and that's where you and I have talked about this before. It is prime for the weed trees that are growing up in between my neighbor's fence and the cage baby. So what ends up happening ultimately is they fall into the cage baby. I do know the solution for this. We've talked about that also, which I've not applied. But I have still weeds growing through the mulch, right? Not thick of enough of a layer, right? All of those seeds are still there.
Right.
And so I'm going to go in, pick the few that are there. And once I finish shredding leaves, I'm going to add additional mulch there. And so for the recording, I've not put my summer plants. That's what's primarily going to go into this example of the cage baby this year. I've not put my summer plants in there yet. It's easier to do these things when you have an open space than it is when you actually have plants there. Not impossible, but easier.
Yeah. And I mean, shredding them does a couple things. One, it allows them to break down a lot faster.
Hmm.
I mean, and if you don't believe me, this fall when leaves are abundant, take a pile of leaves, shred them, take another pile, and don't leave them side by side. See which one shrinks the most. It's less surface area, more rough edges,
Hmm.
stuff like that. They will break down a lot faster. In that same breath, though, it's important that if you're coming into the summer season, maybe you want to throw your mulch out a little bit more shredded. So if you're using, like I am, straw mulch, maybe you're using hay, something like that. Even the leaves, put a pile on the ground, take your lawnmower, run over it. You can scoop them up. You can put, if you have a bag for your lawnmower, you can put a bagger on and it'll suck them in and you can dump them in. And then that will help them break down even more. And then in the winter, I always recommend pre-chopping leaves to some extent, but in the fall you could do it less because they're going to sit there even longer. So you could do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
As far as nutrients and